Hey you guys, today we are talking about matter in our ecosystems. Before we were talking about energy and how energy was converted and how it would become less every time it traveled up the trophic pyramid because 90% of it would be lost during cell respiration. But now we're talking about matter, which is a little bit different. Matter is not converted, it is recycled. So remember that we get two things when we eat food. We get energy and matter. And we've talked about energy. Let's talk about matter. The main nutrients or matter that living things are made up of are, remember New Hampshire COPs, nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur. And so when we eat things, we are getting these elements and we're putting them inside of us. And so Earth is a closed system. This means that when it was formed 4.6 billion years ago, all of the elements that came together to make our planet, that's all that we have. We're not getting new materials. So all of the carbon that we have on Earth is all of the carbon. And so when we breathe out carbon dioxide, it's not going to just disappear. It's going to be recycled. It's going to be used again. A plant will take it up and use it. It'll take in, remember photosynthesis, it'll take in the carbon dioxide. And then it takes those carbons from the carbon dioxide and it builds glucose. And then that glucose is going to be the pieces in which the plant is made up. And then we eat those pieces of, we eat that glucose or we eat that carbon. And that carbon becomes part of us. And so that is how it is recycled. It is used again and again and again. So that carbon sometimes is attached to oxygens. That carbon is sometimes attached to hydrogens. But it always remains a carbon and it'll never go away. That carbon is a carbon, so it's going to be recycled. And I just think this is funny. We could be drinking dinosaur pee. So the water that's on Earth is the water that we have on Earth. And so when we drink a glass of water, who knows, it could have been dinosaur pee, but we're not getting more new water on Earth. So matter is recycled, just like we said. It is used again and again. It takes on different forms. So here, if we track carbon specifically, let's start here with the plant. The plant will take it in. And then something will eat plants, so animal will eat plants. And so that carbon becomes part of the cow. But the cow will excrete it out, and that cow poop will fall to the ground, or the cow will eventually die, and the carcass will fall to the ground. And then it's going to decay, and it's going to become part of the earth. And if it is buried without any oxygen, it will become a fossil. That's how fossils are made. They have to be buried without any oxygen. That way it can't be decomposed. But if it falls to the ground and there is oxygen, well then other organisms are going to eat it. So bacteria and worms, and they're going to eat the carcass. They're going to breathe out that carbon dioxide just like we do, and it goes into the atmosphere where a tree is going to take it in. And so here, if we see, let's follow this carbon back down here to where the cow ate the plants. Let's say that the cow or a whole bunch of plants is somehow buried without having oxygen. It's going to fall deep, 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 deep into the earth over time, over millions and millions of years. And it's going to break down in a different way. It's going to be broken down by different bacteria without oxygen. And so what happens is without this oxygen, it becomes fossil fuels. This is where we get coal. This is where we get oil. It is these living things that died and were buried without oxygen. And so what we do is we take that fossil fuel out of the earth, and it has a lot of energy in it. There's a lot of carbon in there. And let me take that back. There's a lot of carbon and hydrogen, which those two have a lot of energy. Those two molecules together can hold a lot of energy in their bonds. And so we pull those the coal, the oil up, and we bring it to factories and we ignite it on fire, and that is what gives us energy. By burning, it gives us electricity. It powers our cars. It fuels our cars. So through combustion, so we burn that coal, we burn that oil, and when we burn that coal and oil, that carbon is then released. We call that through combustion. So when we break something down with fire, it's called combustion. Those carbon molecules then go into the atmosphere. They're going to attach to oxygen, which are already in the atmosphere, and then we have carbon dioxide, which will then feed our plants. And so we are pulling lots of oil and lots of coal from the ground. We are igniting a lot of it on fire and through combustion and putting it into the atmosphere. So we're taking carbon that used to be in the ground and putting it in the atmosphere now. So we just looked at how carbon flows through, or how carbon is recycled through the carbon cycle. Let's look at how nutrients are cycled through the food chain. And so a food chain is a series of steps in which organisms transfer nutrients or matter by eating and being eaten. Let's remember that we want to talk about the decomposer, because it's a big part of this. We didn't really talk about the decomposer in our energy notes, but it's a big deal in the matter notes. So our food starts with our producers. They get the energy from the sun to take the carbon out of the atmosphere. So our plants are very important because they can take the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into a form in which we can eat it. Because we can't eat carbon dioxide, but we can eat plants. So producers are very important. And the sun is what fuels it, is what allows it to do that. That gives it the energy. But we're talking about matter, so let's talk about the carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the phosphorus. And so the nutrients, the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, the phosphorus, the sulfur, is eaten by a primary consumer. That primary, all of those nutrients, not just 10%, all of those nutrients are going to be passed on to the secondary consumer. The secondary consumer is going to be eaten by a tertiary consumer. All of the nutrients are going to be passed on. And what isn't used is going to be then passed as waste. And then we have our top predator. And when we get to the top predator is going to eventually pass away. And so at every step, there was going to be excretion or poop. There's going to be grasshopper poop and mouse poop and snake poop. And then we're going to have bird poop. And then we're also going to have dead carcasses. And so why are decomposers so important? Because what they do, so our mushrooms, some of our worms, the things that oftentimes we find kind of gross are so important. Bacteria, big deal, very important. What they do is they take these pieces, the carbons, the hydrogens, the oxygens, the sulfurs, they break them down. So when it's in the form of a mouse and the mouse dies, the decomposers break it down back into dirt. All of the poop and all of the dead animals are going to become dirt again. And why is that important? Well, it's going to be used to grow more producers, or it's going to be released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide so that they can be taken in by producers. So if we didn't have decomposers, we would have an earth just filled with poop and dead things, and that wouldn't be good at all. So sometimes the ooey gooey scary things, the uncomfortable things, are sometimes the most important. So these decomposers are a big part. It completes the cycle. So remember that energy was a trophic pyramid where the energy went up and was eventually lost. But here it is a cycle. And so it's going to always return. It's going to come back around. It's going to be cycled and used again and again. So food chains start with primary producers. These are also known as autotrophs. Matter is passed on to consumers. And then the food chain ends at the top predator. Just going over some vocab. So now we're looking at a food web. And this is a whole bunch of food chains put together. And they're a lot more complex. I'm sure you are picturing a food web with like 10 or 15 different organisms where you can see the little lines that connect them. These are very, very complex. The ones that you're thinking of are very basic. This is actually a simplified food web for the Northwest Atlantic. So it's simplified. And so food webs are very important to show how things are interconnected. And so some species are going to be more important than others. So here, right here, we have a species, I can't read that, but it is going to interact with many different other species. And so if we were to take that species out, it would have, if we were to remove that species out, then the things that eat it would go hungry. And then the things that it eats would not be eaten, and they would become very populated. Their numbers would go very high. And so when we have to think of these things as a very interconnected web where everything impacts everything else. And they're very complex. So if you take one thing out, we don't always know what the effects are going to be. We like to think that science can solve everything and we know everything. But what we know is actually so much less because of how complex, how complicated it really is. And so if you take this out, we can foresee how it'll affect some things, but we don't really know all the time how it's going to affect everything. So remember that life is very complex, and we don't always know what's going to happen when we change something. All right, that is the notes for how matter flows through ecosystems. I hope that you guys understood all of that, and we will chat later. I hope you're doing great.